Welcome to the Provisionist Perspective. I am Drew, the
And
biggest
I'm Eric.
moron on the internet.
And I interrupted you. I'm Eric. I would never take that title from you. You know, I love you too much. I think too highly of you. I would
That's
never
high
try to
praise.
compete. High praise. So yeah, I'm just with the biggest moron on the internet.
And today we're going to be, now I want to put a disclaimer out there. I called this episode responding to internet Calvinism because we get a lot of critiques that this isn't Reformed Orthodoxy, this isn't Reformed Scholasticism. So this is just an internet Calvinist, a Calvinist guy on the internet who's responded to some of our social media posts, and we're responding to him. So we're not saying that all Calvinists believe these things, but he took the time to review some of our social media posts, and I thought it would be cool to jump on here and talk about it. So both of us have seen this episode. We haven't had the chance to, because of our just so important and busy lives, been able to take notes and stuff like that. So it's going to be part response and part react, and we've got about an hour to do that. And hopefully at the end, you'll get to see why I'm the biggest moron on the internet.
And I mean, for me, my excuse is I'm a Californian turned Texan turned Idahoan now, and there's a foot of snow outside. And so when I don't know what to do with myself. I have no idea what to do. And all my Idaho fans are like, oh, but I'm freaking out. I don't know. I'm shoveling
What
snow
is
like
this white
crazy. I don't know.
stuff?
What is this? What is happening? This is my second winter, and I think last winter I shoveled once. Now I've shoveled thrice in a week. So and especially it's not over yet. I don't know. We'll see. But it's crazy out there.
Well, it is boiling here. So I had to get my wife to take the kids out so that I could have the downstairs to myself with the air conditioning. Otherwise, I would be sweating because it is very
You live on a
hot
different
upstairs.
planet. Like you do not live
Yeah.
on Earth. You live on a different planet.
I think it's like early 90s here or something. Oh man, it's just so hot. Okay. Anyways, without further ado, we'll crack into it. If you have questions or comments, especially if you have a question you want us to engage with it, if you type all caps question or at Provisionist Perspective, then feel free to do that. Follow us on X/Twitter at ProvisionistP. We're going to be talking about a lot of our Twitter posts. So here we go. Our X/Twitter posts.
Yeah, Amber Marone. Yeah, everyone's the friends I've made here. A lot of them are transplants, and so they're playing it off cool like I am. But then I have Idahoan friends. They're just like, get over it.
Right. Completely normal for them. Kiwis are under the illusion that they have like this temperate climate. And so it seems like a lot of places like AC is coming back in, and it's like a box unit, that you have on the wall. And but they don't do ceiling fans here, weirdly. Like nobody has ceiling fans. So you have to go and like set up, one of those stand and swivel things. And oh man, it's just okay, let's crack into it. I know you didn't come here to hear us talk about this. Is what happens when we do lives, we just ramble at the start. So here we go. Let's jump into this. Let me know if you can hear this okay.
Now, for those on the other side who might immediately sort of react to my argument here, and by just jumping straight to this, well, God is controlling everything, then that just makes us puppets. We've all heard this before. I have a little thread here I want to go through. Provisionist Perspective is saying, who is ultimately, quote unquote, in control of our thoughts?
I just want to add some context here, or make the point that I was making with this, which is this. Hold on, I got to put this back up here again. If you can look at this tweet, this is from Gabe from when we understand the text, and he says, "Men, control your thoughts. Women, dress modestly. Not a difficult concept." He got a lot of interaction on this. I forget what the kind of cultural moment on X was when he tweeted this, but something was going around. And this Daryl B. Harrison, he also runs a podcast, and he's a Reformed brother, a Calvinist brother, and he says this, my take, men, control your thoughts so that you will not lust. Women, control your thoughts so that you will not lust to be lusted after. And so I said this, I said, who's ultimately in control of our thoughts? And my implicit argument here, in my own ex Twitter kind of way is like, if God is ultimately in control of my thoughts and you're telling me to control my thoughts, then I don't have any ultimate control over my thoughts. And any lustful thoughts that I have, God is in control of, right? And so this is the implicit argument that I'm making here, and this is going to be Colin of the Consistent Calvinist podcasts, his pushback on that. Do you want to add anything before I just hit play again, Eric?
It's the age-old question as to why a Calvinist is lamenting the state of the world when the state of the world is exactly as God predetermined it to be for his maximal glory. So my thoughts to lust were predetermined for our maximal glory. And yet you're telling me to control them. That doesn't make any sense to us. But the Calvinist lives in a free world universe. They know it. And so they act like it. That's a total rabbit hole. Whatever. Go with the clip. Run it.
Okay. Here we go.
I just went over that, but in this thread, I responded by saying the God who sustains your mind at all moments is in ultimate control. This doesn't mean you don't control your thoughts. It just means that God is in control of your control. Your control is part of creation. It does not transcend it. That's another critical point here, right? Yes, you have control over things, right? If I pick up an object and wave it around, I have control over that object. But God, who sustains all things at all moments, has control over my controlling that object. That's not a contradiction because God is transcendent. It only seems like a contradiction in most people's minds because they view God as alongside man, right? They'll never come out and say that or admit it, but when they think of God controlling things, they view God as alongside man. And so, well, it's either God controlling something or man. When really, if God is transcendent in control of the entirety of creation at all moments, then whatever control is happening within the creation is under the overall transcendent control of God. So Preious' perspective responds by saying, well, if God is in control of your control, then our quote unquote control, he has control in quotes, is in no meaningful sense ours, but merely an extension of God's. Now, this is just, that type of thing.
Again, I want to add just a little bit of context here for what he's talking about. You can see this tweet here. It's kind of hard to see, but you can see the subpoint underneath it. And I said, don't Brother Daryl and Gabe think we are always thinking exactly what God has decreed for us to think for his glory and our good. And so my point is, why complain about what's happening if our control is exactly as it ought to be, is what I was saying there. And I want to tell a quick story. So this was inspired. I tweeted this the other day. This was inspired in part by this interaction or these kinds of interactions. My little girl, she loves Peppa Pig, and she was in her bed and she was playing with Mummy Pig and she was banging her on the wall. Told her several times, don't bang on the wall. We have neighbors. And so I said, how many times? Don't bang on the wall. And she goes, precious little thing that she is, 3 years old. It's Mummy Pig. It's Mummy Pig. Like I'm holding Mummy Pig, and but it's Mummy Pig that's doing it. And I said, Phoebe, you're in control of Mummy Pig, so it's you're doing it. Please stop. and then I basically kind of tweeted that interaction and then said, let the reader understand. And this is what I mean by, if God is in control of our control, then our control is in no meaningful sense ours, but merely an extension of God's. So it's not, to use the illustration of Mummy Pig, it's not her control. Let's say she's got a will of her own, thoughts of her own, and everything, and Phoebe is still able to control her and do this sort of thing. there's no meaningful control there, and that was my point. It's just an extension. You're just an extension of God's will. You're doing what He wants you to do at all times. And then Colin makes this argument that we are alongside God. We think that we're alongside God and that there's two players. Either God's in control or I'm in control, and it can't be both. But he's saying, no, God's on another level up here. He's transcendent. So he's able to control up here in a way that establishes your control down here, is his argument. Anything to add?
My pushback on that would be, when he says God is transcendent, what he's trying to like shoehorn into that is that you can't understand how this is possible. So to you, it seems like because of your finite mind, your immanent earthly mind, you have to look at that and see two players, and that's all you can decide, all you can understand, because your mind is. And so what actually is happening though is that you can't understand a heavenly register, a transcendent register, at which God is able to control while you're still in control. You just can't. You're not thinking on the right wavelength. You're not thinking at the right register. And he's transcendent over your sort of earthly immanent perspective. My problem with that one is it's a cop out, and it explains nothing. Like it's you just saying the phrase "God is transcendent," like, doesn't make your theology correct, and it doesn't do the work you think it's going to do. And like I could explain that a little bit more in the sense it's not doing the argument work you think it's doing. But also, you actually aren't claiming he's transcendent, because you're claiming to understand him completely. You're in how he interacts with man's responsibility and man's control and the control of the universe. You are claiming that your earthly mind understands it rightly and, sufficiently, if not completely, because there's nothing that you're saying you don't understand about this. You're saying no, that's not how it is. There's this heavenly. You're claiming that you understand how it actually works. So you're not actually claiming that God is transcendent. You're just saying the phrase God is transcendent in order to end around your way away from the argument that we're making, that you're responding to. You're like shifting it away from away from our argument, rather than like proving it wrong. You're just like, no. Wait a minute. Let me shift the topic to a topic of God is transcendent. And then I'm going to use the same earthly faculties you are to explain exactly how God works. It's like, but I can't do that.
It's like the whole, right. It's like the whole argument. You can't reason down and then up to God. You have to reason from God down. You're starting at the wrong place. You have to reason up and then down. And you're not dealing with the actual argument. He who shall not be named often argues in this way. I don't recall what Colin's argument is here. We're going to go on to listen to him and just see how much of this we can get through. He may go on to make it clearer. I don't remember, but we'll just hit play.
Thinking only comes from people who are viewing God as alongside everything else, right? Does God control the weather? Well, yeah. Does that mean that when the wind blows the clouds, the wind's not controlling the clouds? It's just an extension of God's control? Well, no, of course not, right? But if what Preious' perspective just said here is true, that if God controls our control, then our control isn't really ours in any meaningful sense. It's just an extension of God's. You just take that and apply it to the other things that God does control, and you'll see how absurd that immediately becomes, right? So just ask the other side, what do you believe God's in control of? And does that then make it an extension of God? It's like this weird, almost pantheistic assumption.
No. I don't think God's in control of the weather like that. Nope.
Well, so here's the thing. I would say let's assume, for argument's sake, that God is in control of all of the weather at all times. When somebody gets hit by a lightning bolt, he does that. Okay. And granted, let's take the person getting hit by the lightning bolt out of this, but like, weather is largely amoral, and so it would be an extension of God's will in the sense that the weather is always doing what God wants it to do. Whereas if you introduce another individual with a will and desires in it, and they're making choices, and those choices bear out, then you're going to say these things that are happening is an extension of what God wants to happen. That would be accurate. And there's no difference between what I mean, regarding
Okay,
the
I see
control,
what you're saying.
regarding the control, you would say, if God's controlling me to do this, then I'm not meaningfully doing this. And a cloud isn't doing anything. I mean, a cloud's just being a cloud, and it's just raining through mechanical weather processes. So I don't know that this is really a very good analogy to, because we're talking about moral beings that end up being an extension of God's will, if that makes any
But even
sense.
moral beings that end up being an extension of God's will, but and yeah, that God set up a process in which he allowed moral agents to have moral agency. And so they're doing what God wants them to do in the sense that they're exercising their moral agency. But that doesn't mean, but God isn't directly controlling or controlling at all. Like not directly controlling, but controlling at all what they're doing. He set up the universe such that moral agents would have moral agency, and he wanted it that way. But that's not control. And in the same way with the weather, he set up the weather to act in this way. But he's not directly controlling the weather.
This comment reminds me of some of those Joey and Phoebe memes that we've made. Job 28:26 says, when he made a decree for the rain and a way for the lightning of the thunder. So it says a way for the lightning of the thunder, not that God directs every single lightning bolt at all times immutably before creation.
Of course he decreed for the rain to be the way that the rain is, and the way and for lightnings and storms to be the way they are. Like of course he did that. That a decree has zero connotation of control, ongoing control, especially of the meticulous type that Colin insists has to be happening.
It's like people see the word decree and they assume immutable all things before creation. And it's just like saying when he made a command for the rain and a way for the lightning of the thunder. And Matthew's touching on a point here. He says, we cease being morally autonomous beings if we're just mechanically determined. And I think that Colin's view of divine providence is very mechanical. It strikes me as very mechanical. And I think it was Mind Trap in here earlier that asked this question. Let me see if I can find it. I guess it doesn't really matter because he just wrote, oh, here we go. He goes, occasionalism, right? So I'm not, feel free to correct me in the comments and stuff like that. But occasionalism is a different kind of determinism, theistic determinism, where from what I understand, they don't much care to establish secondary causation. So it's just kind of God, as Colin is putting it, sustaining and controlling, causing everything at every moment, rather than the kind of contingency and second causes being established like most Calvinists would say, is my understanding. I don't want to get into that too much because I wanted to kind of deal with his syllogism, if possible, at a later stage in full, and we don't have time for that today. So,
and that if God is in control of something, it's just like an extension of him. It's like, no, God is not the things that he created, but he can control everything that he created, which includes the relationships of things within that creation, which can include one thing controlling another. Okay. So we're talking about meaningful senses of quote unquote control. I respond by saying meaningful sense is just your opinion. It's meaningful precisely because God is in control. He's the only one who gives actual meaning to anything in the first place. Somebody then responds by saying,
I think this is a little bit of an equivocation or misunderstanding on his part. So when I said you don't have any meaningful control, what I'm saying is that there's no autonomy or separateness between my choices and God's choices. To use the original illustration, if I'm not controlling my thoughts and lusting after other women that aren't my wife, then, and there's no autonomy in terms of my will and my own thoughts, separateness from God, then I am an extension of God, and he's controlling my thoughts, and my thoughts are going in this particular direction. Then I'm not meaningfully in control. I mean, you can say that I'm in control, and this, I mean, people are going to nitpick all these analogies and stuff, but if we go back to the mummy pig thing, she's in control of a mummy pig with her will and her being and her thoughts. Mummy pig has, this toy has these thoughts and things. So in what way is mummy pig's thoughts her own? And that was my point in all of this. And I
No,
think
no one watching a sci-fi movie thinks that the person who's being controlled by the computer chip or controlled by the alien or something is morally responsible for what they're doing, or has any kind of, there's an aversion of control that person has. And Colin would go, yeah, but see, I already addressed that with the transcendent thing. So you're doing the first player, second player thing. See, you're doing exactly what I'm doing. And that, again, the equivocation, the misunderstanding there is, it's not the argument that we're making, the equivalence that we're drawing isn't in the mechanism of the control. It's not in, we think that your view of God, the determinist view of God, is just like the sci-fi movie I watched. Like that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is what you're saying, Drew, there's no meaningful difference. There's no meaningful full control. He can do it in a different transcendent way. Whatever, you can put whatever transcendence you want on it. The point of the criticism of when you tweeted who's in control wasn't, you weren't making the point, I don't like the determinism. You were saying that the determinism removes the responsibility of the agents. That's your point. And so Colin can go, right?
Yeah, I mean, in my sub point, so I posted the top thing, and then I talked about how, don't Gabe and Daryl, don't they believe that I am thinking exactly what God is controlling, has sovereignly decreed me to think at all times. So then what sense does it make to say men control your thoughts?
So
that was my point.
And the reason that men control your thoughts is so important for Christian living, so important for philosophy and theology, is because it puts the responsibility of Christian living on the Christian, which is where it should be. So that's the argument. So Colin can come in and say, see, but what you're actually doing though is you're thinking of control in a one player, two player. That doesn't have it. That's not the argument. We're not saying that God is controlling someone in that way. We're saying it doesn't matter how he's controlling it. If he's in control, then we're not. And if we're not, then he's morally responsible for evil.
Here's the problem. Here's the problem. I suspect, anyways, that brothers like Colin, they think that if we had a higher or more transcendent view of God, then this would make sense to us. And we would say, oh, he's on the heavenly register and not on the, and because you're making this argument, that means you think that they're side by side with one another. And then, like you said, it feels to us anyways, Colin, others that might agree with Colin, that this isn't around. This is like, now we're talking about transcendence and what that means for control and divine providence, which we can have that conversation, but that feels like a pretty big deflection in terms of the point that we're trying to make. And I will say there are probably precious few of you out there in terms of our viewers, but there's deeper philosophical ideas of Frankfurt cases and guidance control with regards to compatibilism and incompatibilism and stuff like that. I'd love to get into that one day. Colin doesn't make any of those arguments as far as like what's necessary for moral responsibility on determinism, on God having predetermined everything. So I'm not going to go into that, but I guess I want to acknowledge that we could go deeper into this, but A, I don't feel qualified to do that, and B, that's not the purpose of today's broadcast. So here's Colin, or maybe Colin's friend. He runs the Consistent Calvinism Shorts podcast. You would be God's mean of determining righteous acts, like hearing the word as a means to someone believing. I don't understand what that means. I'm sorry, maybe Colin. I don't understand that. Did you understand that?
Yeah, I didn't understand that either. Like, if you could rephrase it, I could, like,
We're gonna.
I guess I'm just saying that what we're saying here is that, if you want to respond, to what we're saying here, that's great. But what our point is that the means of his control, or how transcendent he is, or whatever, that's fine. That's kind of like an end around, kind of a dodge to what the point of the argument is, which is that if the control isn't meaningful, then God is responsible for evil. So,
Right.
yeah, you can address that part of it if you'd like. But
James said he's responding to me. I think I didn't see him comment elsewhere in here, so that looked like the very first comment. But, anyways,
So if I understand, you're saying
I might skip past this because this isn't him interacting with us, and I don't really want to comment on other people's interaction. I think we've kind of made that point. So just for time's sake, because we won't get through even
next
all
we have
of this
another
today.
tweet from Provision's perspective. He's commenting on Acts 4:27, 28, or excuse me, I think this particular portion comes from Acts 2. The crucifixion was according to God's definite plan and foreknowledge. I think it, I don't have it in front of me. I think it says delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God. And then he mockingly says, yes, theistic determinism, and then has multiple facepalm emojis, as if this is a non sequitur. Now, I'll admit that the Acts 2 reference, just read simply like that, definite plan and foreknowledge, you might be able to say, oh, see, so God has foreknowledge of free will choices, and then has a definite plan that involves those things. But that's why we don't really go to that verse as Calvinists. I've heard some mention it, but we go to the Acts 4.
So many people have gone to this passage as a proof text for theistic determinism. If it's not your favorite passage, then great. But this feels like again, this is. Let's just let him talk. We'll let him get to his point with the other passage.
4:27-28 passage, right? Because that's where it clearly says that it's God's hand and plan, not just his plan, but God's hand predestined those things to take place. And those things included the sinful actions against Jesus Christ of Herod, Pontius Pilate, peoples of Israel, etc. So I respond to this tweet by saying whose plan was ultimate? Because let's go to their view. Their view is the crucifixion was according to God's definite plan and foreknowledge. So instead of yes, theistic determinism, they say, right? So they're saying, that would be an assumption. Well, sure. They're saying, what's their assumption? Whether they realize it or not. Their assumption is, see, free will. We get to insert free will into God's definite plan and say that God made a plan that is a response to free will. So I say, whose plan was ultimate, God's or man's? Who ultimately determined it? God, which would be theistic, or man? Could it have not happened? Where is your articulation of the passage given your view? Because they didn't articulate their view. They didn't say, well, that's not what it means. It means this. They just sort of threw it out there in this mocking way. I said, don't just tell us what it doesn't mean. Tell us what it actually means. Now, it's kind of funny because they responded by saying, again, sort of sarcastically here, convert the.
Well, I'll address this. This is me interacting with him, so I'll address my comment here in a second. But he kind of goes off into a little bit of a side note here. So that was his main point was that it's not this passage that we go to, but that it's by God's hand. And so, who is it? Is it man's ultimate plan, or is it God's ultimate plan?
So I think I'll say that our view would be, correct me if I'm wrong, Drew, anybody in the comments can correct me if I'm wrong, that it is absolutely man's ultimate plan when he commits evil. So a rapist decides to rape. That is not God's ultimate plan. That is man's ultimate plan. So yes, man's plans can be ultimate. We can get into the weeds of all that, but I'm fine with, yes, man ultimately plans evil things, and his plan is the ultimate. Yeah, I'm totally fine with that. As for what our view of Acts 13:48 is, Drew, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I would comment is that just because God brings one thing to pass does not mean that he did every single thing along the way in a deterministic way. So just because, and again, let's not forget Jesus's own agency in this, in the crucifixion. He's provoking all of these people. He says in John 10, no one takes my life from me. I lay it down of my own accord and I'll take it up again. So he's not
Right.
to be discarded here. He's actively putting himself in these situations. He goes to the garden and submits to all of this.
That's right.
And so I would say he's actively making this happen. And it's not like God has to predetermine all of the thoughts and intents of every person's hearts. He gets somebody to cast lots in order to fulfill a prophecy over his clothes. Let's talk about prophecy later. That's a that's a big can of worms. You know, there are a few different bits and pieces in there that happen that God brings to pass that are predetermined, but I don't think that he has to do that. And this comes to a conversation. I don't want to get in the weeds on that.
But
I
I
said I
mean,
was going
you
to
don't
talk
have
about
a
philosophy, though.
you don't have a problem with saying that God had a definite plan that his son must die, right?
Right. And I guess what they're thinking when they see definite plan or that by God's hand this happened, they mean every single thing that happened, God's hand was moving all of those different
And it's just
pieces.
not what the analogy of hand means. This is what I don't understand about this. It's like you have to start thinking at in second or third and get down, like you have to look past the initial hand. Oh, well, what do I do with my hands? Oh, I control things. Like you have to look past to these analogies. Is it even he would recognize, I think everyone, if they think about it for 3 seconds, would recognize that God's hand is an analogy. Like it's not his actual hand, right? Like, does God have hands? Right? Like, so why is he using the word hand? Because it is an obvious, I stretch out my hand and this stuff happens. Like, how many times in the Old Testament is he talking about he did something and he describes it as I'm stretching out my hand? Is he stretching out his hand? Come on. He's that he did something and his power was over something. Rod, staff, hand. It's an extension of his power. He is the one who is moving this thing. So yeah, it's by his hand that certain things happen. That doesn't mean it's by his hand that everything happens, and it doesn't even suggest that in order to get that thing done, the thing that he is stretching out his hand to accomplish, that he has to like determine and control every, that concept isn't even there at all. You're muted.
Yeah, it seems to be a common thought among theistic
You're still
determinists
muted.
that how?
Oh, can I not?
Check, check, check. Can
Can
everyone hear
people hear
me?
him?
Can you maybe Eric's headphones have died? Someone tell me if who's right, Eric or me?
Oh, you
Can
hear?
you
So
hear
this is me.
me?
Okay. Keep talking. Go ahead. You do you.
Okay. You just can't
Somehow
hear
this is
me?
me. Okay.
Peter says he hears me. Okay, so um yeah, so I was going to say that theistic determinists, it seems to me, have gotten into this thought pattern that unless God has predetermined everything, that if he announces something to come to pass, that he can't get that thing to come to pass. Or if he wants something to happen, he can't ensure that it happens. And I don't think that that's the case. I think God's more powerful than that. God has resources and influence and all that different things at his fingertips, in his hand. And so, yeah, that's how I would respond to that. Eric had me
Yeah. What
muted.
I did.
What
Yeah, I
does
had you
by
muted.
his hand mean? Well, you explain that. I mean, to use
That's good.
an analogy, Eric, if I'm not very good at analogies, actually. But like, let's say I helped Phoebe and my son to put these Duplos together and different stuff, and we built this amazing structure together. I'm giving them and counseling them, and that I could say, by my hand, we have made all of this creation, or I have made all of this creation. I brought this to pass with my will. That doesn't mean that I was meticulously controlling them. I think that the problem that often gets us like two ships passing one another in the night is that some of us read passages and think that there's some kind of metaphysical, it's describing some kind of metaphysical reality, whereas we would be more biblical theologians of saying, what does this idiom mean? How's this used elsewhere? How, you gave a few different examples of hand, rod, staff, and all that other different stuff. So yeah, Peter
like
says,
the king, like you're Leighton for the analgesis. That's right. We need him and his choice meats and his chess boards and all that. What would a king do, right? Like you would come before the king, and the king would go like this with his hand, or the king would go like this with his hand, or like you're at Gladiator, right? Like everyone's like, oh, does he live? Does he die? And the king goes, dead, right? By his
and you
hand.
could say by his hand, this gladiator was killed. Couldn't you?
That's right.
And this is the frustrating thing I think about two ships passing one another in the night. I assume this is Colin.
There
I
it
don't
is.
know.
There it is.
You are not God.
This
We
is
were
the
asking about God's
transcendent.
hand.
This is the
So
this is the cop out.
There's no argument that we could make. There's no analogy or anything that we could say besides determinism that would satisfy this. Because any analogy that we make, any comparison that we make is going to be not about God, because we would just be restating the same thing in different words.
Josh. Josh. This is Josh. So Josh, God is using the analogy for hand. Can I use it now? Can I talk about God's hand in the way that he talks about his hand? That's the analogy he uses for himself. Can I use it now?
In your example with the king, that's a good example. Like God compares himself to a king, to a sovereign. That's ultimately what God's sovereignty looks like in the scriptures. There's no word sovereign in the Old Testament. The closest words that we have are like God of gods and King of kings and stuff like that express the idea of authority over others, but it isn't the word sovereign. So anytime the word sovereignty or the idea of sovereignty is expressed, it's in the context of authority and kingship.
So when God calls himself, why is God using the analogy of a hand, rod, staff, kingship? Why is he doing that? So that we can understand how he acts. Why would he use the analogy of a king when we all know what that means? We all know what that looks like. In the West, it's a little bit different. We've lost sight of kings, but we understand it from our history books, and we kind of a little bit. But in their world, they swim in a world of kings. And so he's using it to describe in a way that we would understand how he acts. He is a king, and he is unlike human kings in lots of ways, but he also compares himself in a kingship way, sovereign hand, rod, staff, just like earthly kings would do. Is he describing himself accurately or not? Like, I guess what you're claiming, Josh, is you're claiming to know that even though he's using the term hand, which is a term of authority, analogy of authority, he's using the term rod, scepter, king, that he actually means those things in a totally different way than what we would understand him to mean in relation to those things. Like, okay, you're going to have to make that case, though. You don't just get to just say that.
Yeah, and Eric Edwards makes this point here. He says, let's ignore the point and focus on the analogy. It's just like we've given an analogy, the analogy made a point, and then we're focusing in on the analogy, which I think is missing the point. So let's click play and I'll respond. I mean, So we can yada yada this a little bit. I said convert the Twitter arguments into podcast episodes, brother, because basically I kind of felt like I'm interacting so much with you online, Colin. Can you actually be a content creator and respond to some different stuff, or put a positive case or negative case out there and stuff? Because when I took the shot, he hadn't put anything out there in like 7 months. And so I guess he took some of my advice and did some stuff. I didn't mean this to be a jab, like, and then I go on to say, I'd really rather not just go down this rabbit trail. We've been down it a bunch of times on Twitter. If you want to make an episode, that's fine. I just kind of felt like maybe I'm enabling here, and I just don't want to have this conversation. So he was kind of saying like, I didn't mean it, in other words, to say you must make content and then I'll respond to you. I'm just trying to steward my time, and we're primarily a podcast with a Twitter account. And so I want those things to be connecting together rather than just having conversations over here, if that makes sense to you guys. So just for time's sake, we're going to kind of yada yada this. Yeah, I mean, I said here I was going to make a response to you, for instance, but with respect, it didn't seem worth the time since you're not active. Like, if you're an active podcaster and you're putting out content, then I feel like, okay, this is worth the time to have this conversation and so on. I just didn't feel like it at the time. So let's
have something happen according to the crucifixion, according to God's definite plan and foreknowledge. What does it actually mean? So since we don't have a response here, I'm left guessing, right? God is reacting to the free will choices of man, which would mean that man's choices are actually the ultimate determiner of God's.
By the way, you don't have to put a positive case for everything that you say when you're pointing out the absurdity of other people's beliefs. That's not like a requirement. So my point of the original thing was to say, you see the word definite plan and you conclude theistic determinism. That's not hermeneutically or exegetically responsible. That was my point. I don't have to actually make a positive case. I appreciate the challenge, put your actual view out there, but that's not required.
And then what he just said was, again, there seems to be like this thing where, and again, I mean, we fall into this trap too. It's like, I want the pushback, right? Like, please tell us when we're doing this, and we want the pushback and everything like that. But just because you say something is the case doesn't mean that's the case. So what he just said was something along the lines of, if you're saying that God is responding to man's free will choices and God is a responder, then that means that man's choice is ultimate. And then, they're controlling God and their choices are ultimate. I don't even have a problem with that. You're acting like that's some sort of bad thing. Why can't God choose to respond to man's choices? Why can't he do that? I suspect you're going to say something like, well, the transcendent, the control of creation, he can't do that. And I'm just going, I don't understand why he can't make that choice. Is God free enough to make the choice that he is going to respond to the moral agency that he gives? He gave the moral agency. Let's not get mistaken. He gave it. We don't have it without him. No one thinks that we're creating it ourselves, right? He gave it, and then in our view chose, not in all things, not in the crucifixion, right? Like he chose that the crucifixion was going to happen. He chose, his definite plan was that the son would die. Okay. So not all things, but in a lot of things, he has chosen to respond to God's to man's agency. Why can't God make that choice? You're going to have to explain that to me.
Yeah. And again, it depends on what you mean by man having the ultimate will in a scenario. There's various different ways that we can take that. You don't have a problem with that. I have a little bit more of a problem with that, depending on what is meant by it. And again, you got to paint the picture here. Like, God's initiating, he's drawing, he's giving light, he's sending people, evangelists.
That's a lot of stuff.
Normal people.
That's a lot of stuff he's doing that isn't a response. Yep.
And then the person responds in faith, and he's like, oh, well, that means that I got to save this person now, and they have the ultimate decision in this. Like, what? Like, actual what? That doesn't follow. Like God wants that person to be saved, and he set up the whole thing so that the person will trust in him, and he's not reacting just because somebody responded the way that he wants them to or the way that he doesn't want them to. That just, it doesn't follow.
Right. God is either meticulously determining everything. He's because he created everything, therefore he's actively sustaining and controlling everything. And that's the only way that he can act. Or he's sitting back, yawning, doing nothing. It's deism,
Right.
Okay. I mean, if that's what you've decided it has to be, then there's nothing we can say to convince you. Otherwise, we don't view the world that way. We don't think that's what it is, and we don't think that those are the only two options.
Yeah.
As I pointed out in past episodes, you can't have it both ways, right? Either God is the ultimate determiner of what man does, or man is the ultimate determiner of what God does. And it saddens me that so many Christians are perfectly okay with man being the ultimate determiner of what God does.
Like, just because it's neat and tidy,
that doesn't follow.
Yeah.
That doesn't follow. If he had said either God is the ultimate determiner of what man does or man is the ultimate determiner of what man does, then you would have a point. But for some reason, unless God is ultimately determining everything that man does, and I'm not great at the philosophy stuff, or man is ultimately determining what God does, strikes me as like equivocation. Like you're suddenly talking about man controlling God because God's not controlling man. Like it's maybe it's a false dichotomy. It just, I mean, maybe I'm not doing a very good job of this, but that doesn't follow to me. I think that's
in
false.
what sense? Let me ask it this way. See if this makes sense. If God pursues man and does all the things that we know he did to try to bring mankind into a relationship with him, and even to individually actively pursuing people through the people in their lives and their experiences and things like that, he's doing all of these things, and yet he's left it up to the person to decide whether to believe in Jesus or not. In what sense does that make man ultimately controlling God? Like, in what planet? In what logically reason argument? Like, in what way, with God, upholding the universe, making sure that the earth doesn't fall apart, giving that individual their moral agency in the first place, pursuing them both in history, cosmically, spiritually in their lives, but then just leaving the decision up to them. In what way is that God being ultimately controlled?
Yeah.
If God is responding and reacting to libertarian free will choices, then man is set up as the ultimate determiner of what God does. And it gets even worse when you consider.
I want to say this, I forgot this point that I was going to make, but we do believe that man influences God's choices. I would think that would be obvious when he says, I'm going to destroy you, and then people repent, and then he changes his plans and he doesn't destroy them. That's an influence that God opens himself up to by the mere fact that he's interacting with man and pleading with man. That does happen. That doesn't mean that man's controlling God, because God's the one that set it up. God's the one that even gave them the option to repent in the begin with. So
I give my choice I give my toddler a choice between eating peas or eating vegetables, or eating applesauce. They can eat peas or they can eat applesauce. And because I gave them that choice, and they're controlling me. Like, do you see how absurd that sounds?
Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and put this other clip up here because I don't want to run out of time. And I feel like I kind of promised you guys that I would show this. Wife just messaged and she said she's going to be here on the hour mark, more or less, maybe 5 minutes past. So I just want to put this up here. If you guys are really enjoying this episode and you're liking this interaction, let us know. We can continue responding. He goes on to interact with a few of our posts. But here's why I'm the biggest moron on the internet. Some responses are like Collins, which we appreciate, and others are like this, which are, quite frankly, just hilarious. So here we go.
So I'm glad I caught this before. This guy might. This is so.
This guy's channel is called Althia. I'm probably going to regret doing this. I don't care. I think it's funny. And he says this title, "This guy is the biggest moron on the internet." And then this is what he has to say.
So I'm glad I caught this before. This guy might. This is so stupid that this guy might take this down. That's how stupid it is. So he says, he's talking about First Thessalonians 5:18. He says, it doesn't say give thanks for everything. It says give thanks in everything. What a ding-dong. What a total moron, you.
You're a ding-dong, Drew.
Eric, is that an accurate statement? Is that an accurate statement about 1 Thessalonians 5:18? Doesn't
It's
say
literally accurate. Yeah, he is quoting. He is literally, yes. That's what it.
Okay, let's
That's what it says.
Let's continue.
Well, let's look at the verse.
Yeah, let's look at the verse.
He's going to Greek us.
Okay. In everything, give
us the Greek.
For this is the will of God concerning Jesus. For what's the this, moron? For this, everything.
No.
Everything.
No. That's not how. No.
What
Greek?
What's the this?
Ain pantos.
Oh no.
Everything.
Okay. Sorry. I had a few things going on. Good.
He calls you an idiot and then it goes into the Greek and shows how you said that accurately. And
his point,
he's just wrong about the grammar.
His point seems to be because the word for so okay. Right. The passage says, "Give thanks in everything, for this is the will of God for you in Christ Jesus." So for this, and he thinks that this is in reference to everything, which I did my due diligence here. I thought, right. So I know a little bit about this stuff. If the this is referring to everything, then they would have to be the same gender, right? So for the antecedent to be in the this be in reference to this, they are the same gender. It's possible he's saying give thanks for this for everything, but it's saying this is God's will for you. Like God's will for you is to give thanks in everything. Like that whole clause can also be neuter. Like whenever you talk about like a whole clause, from what I understand, because it's a clause and has multiple genders, it's neuter.
And he calls you.
And so I just like being. I think I like being insulted, Eric. This is like. Do we need to listen to the rest of this? I think that we do.
I think you need to show what you made, the meme you made.
Oh, okay. Let's see.
So we get this, and this is what Drew does with this, because it's just too much. It's too good. It's too juicy. It's way too fantastic. We can't pass it up.
Okay. Share this tab instead. Oh, that's so much easier. StreamYard's like changed that. That's so much easier. Can you see that now? Or do I need to click the... Here we go.
Okay. Yep.
All right. I made this in response.
About First Thessalonians 5:18. He said, it doesn't say give thanks for everything. It says give thanks in everything. What a ding-dong. What a total moron, you. Well, let's look at the verse.
So for those of you that might not be able to see this at some stage, even though we don't have our audio podcast back up quite yet, I'm holding because he freeze framed me with this really weird look on my face. I decided to just shove a soda in front of me, and I thought that would be funny. And then all of a sudden, I realized that I could write Calvinist tears on it. So that's what I did.
And I love what I love about that. What I love about that so much is his tone of voice when he goes, I'm trying to do it. Well, let's look at the verse. And he does it like that. And then when he goes to the verse, he just proves you right. The confidence
you can't make it
and the
up.
swagger. The confidence and the swagger of, well, let's look at the verse. And then you're right.
Yeah, and you commented underneath it, trying to reason with the person. I think that this is Manasseh Jones. He's also commented on some other stuff. I could be wrong about that, but yeah, it was a really. I think this is this is probably my favorite response that I've received so far. My favorite critique that I've received so far. But yeah, that he pretty much completely proved my point. Any concluding thoughts or questions from anyone? I think that
he had on his bad idea jeans. Well, I'm gonna put these pants on. I'm gonna make some bad decisions today.
The biggest, I think the title was probably also what kind of made it my favorite. It was I think he said moron, and then I don't know if he called me an idiot or not. Somebody else called me an idiot online the other day. I might be one. And it was the fact that he said moron, but then in the title it was like the biggest moron on the internet. I just really appreciated the like. I should get a T-shirt made, Eric.
If
maybe that could go on our merch. We could all compete to be the biggest moron on the internet.
That should be in a merch.
Roddy says he didn't look up the verse until he was live. By the way, maybe I need to comment on this later, but somebody pointed out when I posted that video of me, that edited video of me, that I think it's Ephesians 5:18 or 19ish that does say give thanks for everything. So the Bible does say give thanks for everything, Eric. Therefore, God has immutably predetermined everything before creation. That's what that means.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh,
hey, Drew,
and for those of you,
good to see you.
For those of you that you say your thing, and then I'll conclude.
No, I was just gonna say, good to see you, man. Like it's
good to see you too.
It's the new year.
Good to be back. I really enjoy doing the lives where we get to interact with people. It's good fun. I came up with a phrase. Brother Layton said that I needed to shorten. It was may God bless you so that you can be a blessing to others. And he said you got to keep it short. It's share Christ, show love. You gotta be short. So here's ours. You guys ready? Let me cue up the brand so I can just end it out on a punchy note here. So
here we go. I'm loving it. Here we go. See you guys next time.
Be blessed. Be a blessing.